Welcome to Custom Homebuilders Solutions, also known as CHS, a job costing, full accounting, and profit management software designed specifically for the professional home builder. This video is going to be a continuation of a previous video about setting up what is called items behind your cost code centers. In our first video, we talked about how you set up generic items attached to your cost codes master and how you can then open a job budget that will load all of the items behind each cost code that you'll be using on the budget. I'm back on the cost codes master for just a minute before I go to that budget we were on just a minute ago, because I'd like to point out that if I click on this particular cost code for materials, partitions, and wall frame, etc., I can start setting up some items, and this is the wrong one. Notice there's none here, and that will come into play in a minute. I can start setting up some items that may have to do with individual pieces of board, lumber, etc. That's for builders that for some reason want to do, their takeoff themselves and figure out all the pieces of board. Most of the time, custom home builders are not using this, and they're getting bids from the lumber companies, etc. But the feature is here just for those that want to use it. So I'm going to use this as an example for how you can get items and load items on your budget worksheet. And you'll notice some of the things that are set up for this generic item: thick, width, and length. But I'm going to be able to explain this a little bit better once we open the item on the budget worksheet. I just wanted to point out that these are set up as master items here attached to the cost codes. We'll be opening the job budget for the demo job that we were talking about in the previous video in just a second, but before we go, I'd like you to see and notice that this 3110 that I was talking about items, actually this builder, you can tell, is not set up where he's planning really to use items to budget with, but we're just demoing items. When he's doing his materials floor framing, he set it up to be based on frame square feet, and then he's put a default quantity percent of 118.25. That reason for that is he added 10% for contingency for lumber, and then he added 8.25% to that to take into account sales tax in our area. So he's using that default quantity percent for that. That actually is talked about more in videos about budget, but I just wanted to point that out, and then he had a unit price of this. But we already set up in the previous video, we started a budget by loading all items for Vista 3813, and I've already got it opened, and I already did a keyword search for frame, so that I'm just looking at framing stuff to make it a little easier to look at this. But notice that when we started that budget before, this stuff was already supplied based on an upper level, not using items, and I'm clicking on it to open that, and you can see how that quantity percent came in. The frame square feet from our job specs, which we talked about in the previous video, came in. So this was already calculated for us before we started, but maybe we do want to do our own takeoffs and this and that, and we're not really wanting this number, and maybe you have a zero here. I'm going to go take a look at edit items for budget, because we were talking a minute ago about the generic items that are behind this that would have come in, but none are check marked for the budget when they first come in. You have to decide, I'm going to check mark these to use on the budget, all these various little things and all this lumber. And again, if you're managing by exception, a lot of custom home builders just get a bid and they post the total bid amount, or they do their upfront estimating like that guy is just doing. But I wanted to show you that these three generic items came in, and what I'm wanting to do is get these three items, because the same kinds of things will be used for another cost code. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to close this particular one. And now I'm going to look at the next one down. We might want those very same, all those kinds of lumber items in this materials, partition, and wall framing. He's not upfront budgeting for this particular one, and we're not really going to either. I'm just demonstrating items and how you can get them in. But I'll do the edit items for budget for this particular cost code, and like we noticed on the cost code master, there were no items for this cost code 3120 set up. But I'd like to show you how I can go get items. If this showed no records found and we had not loaded items when we opened the budget, we could click this to load all the generic items that go with this particular cost code, but like we saw, there are not any items that we have set up, any master generic items for this particular cost code. But what I'd like to do is get some of those set up but make it a little bit easier for myself. So what I'm going to do is click this Get Other Items, which means I can get items from almost anywhere, from other jobs. I can select a certain kind of assembly and get the items for that. I could get it by item titles or all the items on a certain purchase order, etc. But what I happen to know is that I have some of the same items that I want to use in this cost code 3120. I have those actually in cost code 3110. And if I leave the generic H job, that means the only items that will show are ones that I set up as generic items. I of course could know about some other job that had a whole list of lumber items and select that job to open the window of items for that job to select from. But let's click this Open Get Items window for that cost code. Now this is showing me the generic items that are attached to cost code 3110, and remember that I'm actually working on 3120. So I want to select all of these to actually be included in my 3120 list of items. So I'm clicking select, and you'll see how that's doing a check mark, and these are automatically actually adding these items into the 3120 cost code that I'm working on. So when I close this is going to refresh and is now going to show me those items in 3120. I've just put them into 3120 from the 3110. Now the next thing before we go open one of these to edit it and put some quantities in, etc., that I'd like to point out is that if you hover over this little upward right arrow, it's going to say add this item as a master generic item, or edit the master generic item if there is one. So if I click it, what it's going to do is first look to see if there's already a generic item. And what my goal here is that I'm going to get these 3 items attached as a generic master items for this cost code 3120. So as you add new items while you're working on a budget and you decide I'd like these to be part of my master that loads into the next budget, you can use this item to do that. So if I click OK, it's going to tell me that it's been added. So if I click that upward arrow again, it's going to look to see if there's already one. And after I click OK, it's telling me there is already a generic item set up. But the thing is this is actually the master generic item. This is not the item really that's here on this budget. This is editing the master generic item. And I can edit it here if there's something I'd like to change about it, so that when it loads it will have the right. I could edit the price right here actually for the master generic item. So say you know that a price is different when you're working on a budget, you can click this upward arrow and go ahead and edit your master generic item and change the price if pricing is changing on you. So next time this item loads into any other job's budget, it would have the right unit price on it. So you can see how you can edit your generic items right from this window. Let me go ahead and add the rest of these just real quick. I'm just going to add them. I'm not going to edit them. And I've added that one, and I've added that one, and there we go. So if I had clicked this button, and these are now set up as generic, if I had clicked to load all generic items like I did a minute ago, and I first wanted to see what items are going to load, I've clicked a report. You can see that attached to 3120 we now have those 3 different items set up. Notice that the quantities have come in as 0, so that what we want to do is figure out, go ahead and edit one of these, and hang on it, let me move my pages forward here so I can see how I'm going to edit these. One moment. So now what we're wanting to do is get some quantities attached to these various boards based on whatever takeoffs we've done or something for why we're ordering boards. Remember, I'm not a builder. I just talk to builders to figure out how to get this designed. And I'm editing it, and actually on this budget window I could give this a different assembly if I'm wanting to group these differently when I show a budget. It might have something to do with lumber dash something or whatever, and here's the whole description. But what I want to talk about is, notice that this is set up with a thick of 2, a width of 4, a length of 9, and the length divided by 12 is 0.75. Now you're going to use a footage in doing a board calculation. I'm not going to get too heavy. I think builders should understand this. But one footage you could use is just the thick and the width times this LT1. In other words, thick, width times the length divided by 12. This is the calculation result of doing that. Or you could just do thick, width times length for FT2. And then you can decide which one of these you want to use as your footage. And I've said use footage 1. This footage is 0 until I go ahead and put a quantity in. In this particular case, we're going to say we decided we're going to need 262. It's going to do this 262 times the 6, because I said use FT1, and do 1572. If you first start one of these and it's not loaded from generic, where I set this up to be based 1,000 board feet, which is the MBF code, if there's nothing here and I select MBF, what's going to happen on this unit price that I loaded for the generic, it's going to divide that price by 1,000 and then give a total. So in other words, it's doing all of the math over here and giving the total of those pieces. You can talk to your lumber salesman for how all this math works out. But then it totals what that's going to cost based on that many pieces. And I'm basically done. I just wanted to add a quantity to that one, so I'll save that. And you're going to see in a moment that this refreshes so that it has the totals of that. So let's edit this one really quickly so that we decide on that we need, I don't know, let's decide we need 5 of these for whatever reason it is that we need 5. And so it's calculated a price, and I'll save that. And then that's updating, and I'll edit this one. And we'll decide that we need, let's say 8 of these. I'm just making up numbers, so it probably might make no sense to your home building or anything, but just so you can see this demonstrated. And I'll save that. So now we are going to have some numbers here. And you see the list of items refreshing. And we're going to go ahead and prepare a bid request that we're going to send to the lumber company based on all these quantities that we have. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to check mark these 3 things. I could actually see this bid request checked. Watch how this total changes. I check marked one, and so it's just the total for that one. Instead of individually check marking, if I decide I just want all of them to be check marked to be on a bid request, I can click that select all link like I just did, and it'll go ahead and put my check marks in, and I might have a whole bunch of these, so that makes it kind of easy. And of course I can click unselect all, and notice that this is the total now of all 3 of these. That's also showing the total here of the assembly. So in order to prepare a bid request that I want to send out for, say, the lumber company to give me a bid based on the prices, I'm going to click this button for prepare bid request. Notice we put our own pricing in, but our bid requests aren't going to necessarily show what we put in as pricing. So after I click that, the window that I get is a window that lists all of our vendors, and you'll need to watch vendor setup, etc., for how you attach cost codes to a vendor, various cost codes. But this says it's prepare bid request for vendors attached to cost code 3120. So it found that with these 2 vendors we had attached the cost code 3120 to them. We can attach more cost codes to each of those vendors, like the 3110, etc., so they'd show up in a list. If you need to add more vendors, like say you have a new, you've already set up a new lumber company vendor, you can click this button for add vendors to this cost code. And I would add a cost code for a vendor. I'd select which vendor it is, and that's all I'd have to do. And then I'd use the save icon, and so then that vendor would also be part of the 3120 batch of vendors for the cost code 3120. But what we'll do is we'll just prepare a bid request for the Pro build, and you can do the same thing for the Lowe's. But you have different options. You can do with quantities, no quantities, or just text only. Text only is just sort of a, it's just a thing that tells the various items you want to know it without text, but it doesn't have the quantities. It might be because they're doing a takeoff for you, but then they want to use this. I'm not sure this one would be used that much as a bid request, but you can see how it could be used for certain other items like appliances or something very generic, so that they just give you the pricing and the total. I'll come back to this window in a minute after you open a report. If I do the one no quantities, it's just that they're going to go ahead and do the takeoff for us and then give us our quantities, or they're just going to not fill this in, but it's a bid request. You can send them to please give you the information on these. Now if you've done your own takeoff and you have quantities, which in this case we already got our quantities, we want to send a bid request that's with quantities. And it might be, especially if you're doing appliances and you're sending a bid request, or plumbing fixtures, etc. You want to have your quantities in here, like you want to know, I want to know how much it is for 2 of these kinds of sinks or something like that, but have there, maybe when you set up your item title, you might make it real specific so they recognize it as their own item. You might be setting up assemblies that are for a particular vendor. But notice this particular bid request, if I export it to PDF, or I could export it to Excel and do some other stuff to the bid request first, but if I export it to PDF and go ahead and open that PDF, my PDF reader now has tools, and one of the tools is for emailing this bid request, and so I could use that. You can see the email right here for who you'd be, for who you'd be sending the bid request to, etc., and open your own email and type notes, and this will be attached to it. Or you can save this PDF and email it how you'd like, however you'd like, but CHS puts together this bid request for you. And then once I open the report for that, I'll ask if you want to start a line under vendor bids. There's a whole other screen and area and videos about posting vendor bids as you receive them, but if I go ahead and post a line now, it'll show me when I requested this bid. It won't have any amounts, but it'll start a line on my vendor bids for this, and I'll show you that in just a second. But that's how you checkmark things and send out a bid request for this particular type of stuff. So I've closed the items window for this particular cost code 3120 after we just worked on it. I did kind of stop and jump because I was looking at something. But what I'd like to show you is that over here it says vendor bids on this edit window for the budget. It says edit vendor bids and can do POs. So I'm going to click that because we just told it a second ago to make a line for the fact that we had requested a bid, and you can see that the posted date is today 9/3/19, although earlier I'm kind of cutting up this video and bringing it up to date a little bit better. But anyway, there's a line for that, and so that you could edit this, once you receive a bid back, you could click the edit button for that line of the bid and go ahead and fill in the unit price and information and the total amount. And maybe you might have made another line there for Lowe's that we saw, and maybe you'd be getting a bid for that. And later in the budget videos, etc., you could be choosing one of these for your budget after you filled in the amounts, and it will be selected for the budget. Right now it says none selected, and we're not going to go that far in this video so that it doesn't get too long. So I just wanted to show you how that line got over there when we did that in that previous work, and you can put in your amounts. I'm going to stop this video right now so that we can continue actually on with yet another video about items, and we'll be getting into some things probably using plumbing, etc., for where you use the items and the buyer can make some selections using the items, and also probably about how we will create purchase orders from items. So thank you for watching this video.